For more insight on that, Jillian.
You bet.
Thanks, Leland. For more insight, I want to bring in former CIA analyst and nationally syndicated radio host, Buck Sexton. Buck, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. I want to get right to the heart of this, which is it was a thwarted attempt, thankfully, at terrorism. The FBI spokeswoman, Catherine Zackel, said about Jamison, the would-be terrorist, he was under surveillance and the public was never under imminent danger at any point. Do you buy that?
Well, yeah, Jillian, this is a pretty textbook counterterrorism operation from the perspective of how the FBI does its business, and they deserve a lot of credit here, because if you're trying to avoid all casualties once somebody has radicalized, you can't rely on static security measures. Those often are going to be insufficient. Putting up vehicle barriers, a greater police presence on the streets, those are necessary steps. But the single best thing that you can do in a counterterrorism situation is stop a plot before it goes operational.
Now, Buck, on that point, before it goes operational, I asked you this question because so often in the wake of successful terrorist attacks, we hear that the perpetrator was actually under some kind of surveillance. They were on X, Y, or Z watch list, yet they got away with it anyway. So do we take heart from the fact that in this case, this gentleman was under FBI surveillance and was thwarted?
Well, yes, and there are many cases that are similar to this. Once people add in, and to really understand the nature of the jihadist terror threat against this country, I think it's necessary to do this. Once individuals add together all the thwarted attacks, as well as those that are actually brought to fruition or those that have casualties that are executed against civilians here in this country, you get a much better sense of just how commonplace these plots are, how many of them there have been. 16, for example, against New York City alone since 9/11, most of those entirely thwarted. So the pre-operational efforts of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies are absolutely critical. I would note, in this case, because of his hesitancy, he's clearly going to mount a defense to say that he changed his mind. And Jillian, you asked about people being on the radar of law enforcement. Just supporting the Islamic State rhetorically, just saying that you believe that ISIS is a good entity, you want it to come back, you wish that the caliphate would be global, that is protected speech. And so with
all right, well, Buck, on that, what do you think about this guy, Jamison, believed all along in this process that he was in contact with some kind of senior ISIS leadership in the Middle East, when in reality he was communicating about this planned Christmas terror attack with an under FBI agent. If that wasn't the case, and or put it this way, how would a man like him here in the United States connect with ISIS leadership in the Middle East? Is it really as easy as people say? Is it just logging onto a website or social media?
It's certainly been done by a lot of individuals who have no particular tradecraft training. It's just a question of getting in contact with somebody online and continuing to push and find your way into what are usually chat rooms that have either passwords or encrypted apps. Jillian, is another very commonplace way that jihadists communicate around the globe. In this instance, as you mentioned, we have an undercover FBI officer, and those kinds of efforts from law enforcement are ongoing. And here, what's going to be critical for the prosecution of this individual is going to be whether they can prove an affirmative step was taken or that there was, in fact, a conspiracy. I don't believe that they got him with any actual weapons. He talked about his intent to acquire weapons. He talked about the possibility of the plot. They'll have to prove either conspiracy or material support to a terrorist organization.
And what about, do you take from this instance here, you know, that we're doing better in the fight against lone wolf, self-radicalized jihadists? Meaning we've made huge progress this year against radical Islamic terror in the Middle East, particularly ISIS. But what's lagged behind is similar kind of progress in terms of defeating would-be terrorists who are not officially aligned with ISIS or aren't officially affiliated with ISIS. Does this show that we're going in a good direction?
Jillian, I can't read too much into this. I think to be fair to what's gone on over the last year, we'd have to take into account that you had a would-be suicide bomber here in New York City just a few weeks ago, right in the middle of Midtown, who, if he had better bomb construction, could have killed a whole lot of people. You also had that successful lone wolf attack on Halloween downtown here in Manhattan. You've had a vehicle attack in Melbourne in the last few days that has not yet been classified as terrorism, but it certainly has a bunch of indicators that are making a lot of us think that it was a jihadist terror attack.
So it sounds, Buck, like you're saying we should feel good about this, but we shouldn't rest on our laurels. There's still a tremendous fight ahead. We've got to leave it there this afternoon, but thanks so much for joining us. Hope to have you back soon.
Good to see you, Jillian. Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, Buck.